It started as an ordinary spring day in a quiet Texas town where everyone knew everyone. The town's charm came from its simplicity, but beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. Claire Davis, an 18-year-old college freshman, had dreams as big as the Texas sky. She was known for her kind heart and radiant smile, which lit up every room she entered. Her ambitions were as bright as her spirit. She wanted to become a pediatrician and help children in need. Claire's life revolved around her studies, her family, and her close-knit group of friends who cherished her for her kindness and wit. Claire had recently met Mark Reynolds, a 29-year-old man who seemed charming at first glance. They'd crossed paths at a local diner where she worked part-time. Mark had come in as a customer, and his easygoing manner caught her attention. He wasn't from the college crowd, but his charisma and stories of world travels intrigued her. Their conversation started as casual exchanges, but Mark soon began frequenting the diner more often, always sitting in Claire's section. At first, she found his attention flattering, even endearing. He would compliment her smile, ask about her classes, and share anecdotes that made her laugh. But as weeks passed, Mark's interest became more intense. He began showing up uninvited to places where Claire and her friends hung out. He would text her incessantly, even when she didn't respond. Claire started noticing little things about Mark that unsettled her: the way he seemed to know her schedule, the questions he asked about her male friends, and the way his mood darkened when she didn't give him the attention he wanted. One night, after a particularly awkward encounter where he confronted her for not responding to his texts, Claire decided it was time to set boundaries. When Claire told Mark she didn't want to see him anymore, he didn't take it well. At first, he begged for another chance, promising he'd change. His messages oscillated between pleading and anger, but Claire stood her ground. She blocked his number and confided in her roommate about the situation. Despite her efforts to move on, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Mark's charming facade had crumbled, revealing someone she no longer recognized. She thought she had closed that chapter, but Mark's obsession was just beginning. The night of April 12th, Claire left the library after a long study session. She had spent hours preparing for an upcoming biology exam, determined to keep her grades up despite the recent turmoil in her life. As she walked to her car, the small parking lot was eerily silent. She texted her roommate, letting her know she'd be home soon. Claire glanced around, her senses on edge, but she brushed it off as paranoia. She didn't notice the figure lurking in the shadows until it was too late. Mark had been watching her for days, tracking her routines. He'd convinced himself that if he couldn't have her, no one else could. In his twisted mind, Claire's rejection was a betrayal that he couldn't forgive. That night he parked his car a block away from the library and waited, concealed in the shadows. When he saw her walking alone, he knew it was his moment. Claire approached her car, balancing her backpack and a cup of coffee. As she reached for her keys, Mark stepped out from behind a nearby tree, blocking her path. She froze, her heart racing as she recognized him. His face was twisted with anger and desperation, a stark contrast to the charming man she had first met. "Why are you avoiding me, Claire?" he demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and desperation. Claire tried to stay calm, though her hands shook. "Mark, please, I just want to go home. Let's not do this." Her voice was steady, but her eyes darted around, searching for an escape. Mark's expression darkened. "You don't get to just walk away from me like I'm nothing," he spat. His hand moved to his jacket, and Claire's breath hitched as she saw the glint of a weapon. "Mark, please, you don't want to do this," she pleaded, stepping back. Her voice cracked, but she tried to reason with him. "You can walk away now. It doesn't have to end like this." But he wasn't listening. In a fit of rage, he lunged at her, and Claire's scream pierced the night. The attack was swift and brutal, leaving her lifeless in the dimly lit parking lot. Mark fled the scene, his mind racing with the weight of what he'd done. The coffee cup lay shattered on the ground, a silent witness to the tragedy that had just unfolded. News of Claire's murder spread quickly, sending shockwaves through the quiet Texas town. The community, once a haven of tranquility, was now gripped by fear and heartbreak. The Davis family, Claire's parents and younger brother, were inconsolable. Their daughter, a beacon of hope and joy, had been taken from them in the most horrific way. Friends and classmates held candlelight vigils, their tear-streaked faces illuminated by the flickering flames as they shared stories of Claire's kindness and the dreams she would never fulfill. Law enforcement moved swiftly, and Mark Reynolds quickly emerged as the prime suspect. Witnesses came forward, recounting his obsessive behavior and the heated arguments they had overheard between him and Claire. Text messages and emails uncovered during the investigation painted a chilling picture of a man consumed by anger and jealousy. The police issued a warrant for his arrest, and Mark's face was soon plastered across news outlets and social media. The manhunt for Mark was intense. Officers combed through his known hangouts, questioned his acquaintances, and followed every lead. Helicopters hovered over wooded areas, and roadblocks were set up on highways. Despite their efforts, Mark seemed to have vanished into thin air. Days turned into weeks, and the lack of progress began to weigh heavily on the town. The Davis family, while devastated, publicly urged anyone with information to come forward, their pleas broadcasted nationwide. Then a breakthrough came. A farmer on the outskirts of town noticed an unfamiliar car parked near his property. He reported it to the authorities, who discovered Mark hiding in an abandoned barn. When officers surrounded the structure, Mark surrendered without a fight. His once confident demeanor was gone, replaced by a disheveled and haunted appearance. The town breathed a collective sigh of relief, but the journey toward justice was far from over. The trial of Mark Reynolds became a media spectacle, drawing attention from across the country. Reporters flocked to the courthouse, eager to capture every twist and turn of the proceedings. Claire's family sat in the front row, their grief palpable as they listened to the details of her final moments. Mark, dressed in a suit and flanked by his legal team, maintained his innocence, claiming he had been framed. His calm and composed demeanor was a stark contrast to the evidence presented against him. The prosecution's case was strong. They presented surveillance footage showing Mark following Claire on the night of her murder, witness testimonies about his threatening behavior, and the chilling text messages he had sent her. The jury watched in silence as graphic photos from the crime scene were displayed, each image a stark reminder of the violence that had shattered their community. The defense attempted to cast doubt, pointing to the lack of eyewitnesses to the actual crime and suggesting that someone else could have committed the act. Tensions in the courtroom were high, but the proceedings took a shocking turn on the third day of the trial. During a recess, Mark managed to escape custody. Details of how he slipped past security were unclear, but the result was chaos. The courthouse went into lockdown as officers scrambled to locate him. News of his escape spread like wildfire, radiating fear and anger in the community. How could a man accused of such a heinous crime be allowed to slip away? The search for Mark resumed with renewed urgency. Helicopters and drones were deployed, and officers worked around the clock to track him down. Tips poured in from the public, but Mark remained elusive. His escape cast a shadow over the trial, but the judge ruled that the proceedings would continue in his absence. After all, the evidence against him was overwhelming, and justice for Claire could not be delayed. The jury deliberated for hours before reaching a verdict, guilty on all counts. Mark was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, though his physical absence left a bitter taste in the mouths of those seeking closure. The Davis family, while grateful for the verdict, found little solace in the knowledge that Mark was still out there. Their daughter's killer had been brought to justice in name, but the man himself remained free, a fugitive.